Let's give a warm welcome for your MC and tonight's moderator, Kim Christensen. Enjoy your night.
Thank you, Cindy. This is so cool. I've never been able to do something quite like this, so I'm excited. Thank you. I'm glad to be in Arvada. I didn't have to go far. I love driving to work every day. It's just a joy and a treat in Colorado these days, isn't it? The best thing, though, because sometimes all you do is read news, which is kind of where I spend most of my reading time, is Audible. That's how you can listen to great books and ignore the traffic and everything else that you have to deal with in Colorado because we've grown so much. So I'm expecting to find some new ideas and new books today because I'm really excited to introduce you to our panel. And I can't wait to ask them some of the questions that we have for them, but then I know you have some great questions as well. And I don't think there's anything better than romance. It's the great escape, right? We all need it. We all need it in our life. It's a good escape from the worries of the world. So I'm going to introduce them all, and then we'll get to the questions. We're going to begin with Aidy Award, who is the author of the popular Curvy Love series. She writes erotic romance that features curvy girls and hot heroes. In her words, every woman deserves great romance, no matter her size, shape, or what the scale says. Her Faded Curves and Dragons Love Curves series explore modern romance through a paranormal and fantastical lens. Space Rangers, dragons, and bears, oh my, Aidy's got them all in there. Romance connecting with the readers and stormtroopers. You got it all covered. All right, I love it. Then we have Jennie Marts, is the USA Today best-selling author of award-winning books filled with love, laughter, and happily ever afters. Her books include the contemporary Western romances of The Cowboys of Credence and the Hearts of Montana series, the cozy mysteries of the Page Turner series, the hunky hockey-playing men in the Bannister Brother books, and the small-town romantic comedies in the Cotton Creek romance series. Jennie currently lives with her own happily ever after life in the mountains of Colorado with her husband, 2 dogs, and a parakeet, and she believes you can't have too many books, shoes, or friends. I agree. That's the worst thing about packing for a trip. You never have enough shoes with you. I'm just saying. Courtney Milan is a New York Times and USA Today best-selling author of historical romances, flush with research and wit. Her novels have received starred reviews in Publishers Weekly, Library Journal, and Booklist. Before she was a writer, believe it or not, she worked in theoretical physical chemistry, law, and academia. So she's like super smart, okay? Courtney currently lives in the Rocky Mountains with her husband, an exceptionally perfect dog, and 1 attack cat. Sara Richardson writes rustic romances that inspire you to believe in love, featuring cowboys and the great state of Colorado. Yay! Sara loves humor, a bit of heat, and a whole lot of heart in her storytelling. And using her experiences as a mountain guide, Sara pairs stimulating romance with compelling adventure. A writer, wife, mother, dreamer, storyteller, and explorer, she is a true believer in the power of true love. Yes. Turano is one of the funniest voices in inspirational romance. She is a USA Today best-selling author. She pens kind of quirky historical romances set in the Gilded Age. Her books have earned Publisher Weekly and Booklist starred reviews, top picks from Romantic Times, and praise from Library Journal. A 2-time finalist for the RT Reviewers' Choice Awards. 2 of her books have been listed in the top 100 romances of the past decade from Booklist. And when she's not writing, she spends her time outside exploring Colorado. So we love this. So this is all about romance and the Rocky Mountains and Colorado. So we're going to start with some lighthearted, easy questions and kind of get everybody to know everyone a little bit. So you feel free as we ask these questions to chime in and say, oh yeah, but this first one we kind of want everyone's answer to, which is the fact that nobody becomes an award-winning author overnight. At least I've been told. So what other jobs have you had before you became a writer? And I guess we can start with Sara and then go down.
Yeah. I have had quite a few different sorts of jobs. I find a lot of inspiration from those. So as you mentioned in my bio, mountain guide. So I was a whitewater rafting and backpacking guide before, which was really fun and gave me a lot of material that I draw on now. Worked with a lot of great people, just a lot of interesting situations. So that's one of my favorite probably past jobs that I've had. I've also been a communications manager, and I teach Pilates on the side, very part-time, but I'm a certified Pilates instructor too. So yes, so that's kind of an overview of my jobs in the past.
So my first real job, well, wasn't a real job, I was like 15. I was a lifeguard. And I still to this day can twirl a mean whistle. And that really came in handy. Well, really the only time it came in handy was when I volunteered for the recess when my son was in elementary school, and they were really impressed because I could twirl the whistle. So that was my talent. But I also started working in a department store when I was in high school, and that's what really drove what I ended up doing for my career, because I loved being in the department store. I started on, my first day was Black Friday. They put me in cosmetics, and there was a coupon, and Clinique was giving away a free gift with purchase. And, I'm 16 years old, but I loved it. So when I hit college, I decided I was going to major in fashion, much to my dad's dismay. He thought my brother's a surgeon, and he thought I should go medicine, and clearly I was misunderstood. So I majored in fashion. I was then a buyer after I got out of college, and I worked in New York for years until my husband and I decided that it was about time to if we were going to have kids, I wanted 3, we should probably get around to that. And then I had a Dominic, and so I decided to be a stay-at-home mom. But because I had a Dominic, if any of you have a Dominic, you understand why he's the only child. And And I started writing when he was in 3rd grade, and I wrote a story for him because we had read this series of books. And then we were on book number 6, and it was about this bird. And it was bad, and I never admitted to him that was not the last book in the series. And there were like 6 more, and he just recently found that out. He's just turned 24. He's quite upset with me. But I figure he can go and get those books on his own. But so he suggested that we should write a book on our own, because when he was little, and again, he was a Dominic, to keep him in a jogger stroller, I had to make up stories, because if not, he would unfasten himself and hurl himself out, and we just spent too much time in the emergency room. So I would make up these stories about a dragon. So he's like, Mom, that was a better story. We should write our own book. And that's what we did. And I never even thought about getting published or anything like that, but I really liked using my brain again. So that was the beginning, and it took me 5 years from that time to perfect my craft, get an agent, and then finally get a contract. So my first book came out in 2012, and I've been writing ever since. There you go.
So I have a tiny correction. My name is actually Jennie, not Jeannie.
Did I say Jeannie? Jennie. Gosh.
Sorry.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, since you're all going to be looking me up later, I want you to make sure that we get it right.
Jennie.
Jennie.
We talked about Jen and Jennie. Okay.
Yeah, Jennie, yeah. I'm just a taller version of her.
Here we are. We both have big hair. There we
Yeah.
go.
So I am, let's see, when I always wanted to be a writer. That was something I always wanted to do. I also wanted to be an actress and a newscaster. That was a big thing. And then I went to college and sort of met this guy, and I fell in love, and I don't know what the heck happened for the next 20 years, but I just became a mom, and I'm a little averse to change. So I've been working at a bank for 25 years. Actually, this week is my 25-year anniversary with this bank that I work at. And I got to be part-time, and I got to be a stay-at-home mom with the kids part-time, and I was a hockey mom and a soccer mom, and did all of that stuff. And when I turned 40 and my kids were getting ready to leave and go off into the world, and I was, having that little crisis that you do at 40 when you look back at your life and go, gosh, I always wanted to work at a bank. I decided, I always wanted to write a book, and what are you waiting for, sister? And I got out a notebook and a pen and decided, what do I like to read? And I like to read mysteries and romance and romantic comedy, and I just sort of threw everything into my first book, which it actually worked after a whole lot of editing. And my first book came out in 2012, and I've written 25 since then. So I've 24 published since then, and that's...
And you still work at the bank?
And I was at the bank this morning. I work in Colorado Springs. I worked at the bank until 1 o'clock, and then we jumped in the car and raced up here.
That's good.
I opened an account this morning. Yes, I did.
Well, Sarah, I think yours is a little more complicated, first jobs and other
Courtney.
jobs. No, right? I'm sorry.
I'm
Yeah,
Courtney.
I'm
I'm
going to
Courtney.
get it right. I swear to
It
God.
sounds
Because
complicated.
yours is academia.
And sometimes people say it makes me sound smart, and I just want to preface this by saying that everything I've done makes total sense when you understand that I can focus on one thing for no more than 3 years. And also that I get depression and I'm like, I'm done with you. I will never see you again. So when I went to college, I first thought that I was gonna major in something like sociology, and I was really happy I would never have to take another math course again. And then I majored in math and chemistry and went to grad school in theoretical physical chemistry. Now, you may know that it takes longer than 3 years generally to get a PhD, and my 3 years is my limit. So I hit my limit at about 3 years. I was like, screw this. So I got a master's and I went to law school. Law school takes exactly 3 years, so I did great in law school. And then I went and I clerked for a judge on the Ninth Circuit, and I clerked for Sandra Day O'Connor and Anthony Kennedy. It sounds a lot cooler than it is. We'll talk about that later, probably. And then I was super depressed afterwards for reasons we'll get into. Maybe not at all, hopefully. And so I took a year off and I went on the academic job market and I started writing romance novels at the same time. So at this point I've exceeded my 3 years in law, and so whatever, but I also have a lot of student loans. And so I went and I was a professor for 3 years, which was really my maximum. See, 3 years, I told you 3 years. It's totally my maximum, and that also really depressed me. I loved my students. It was just that they all had so much debt. It was so bad. So in any event, at that point, the romance thing had also started to take off, and I was like, okay, let's give it a try. And so I quit my job as a law professor, and all my colleagues thought I was totally crazy, and they were completely, absolutely right, but totally wrong. Because the great thing about being a romance novelist is if you can finish a book in less than 3 years, woo! So, yeah, there you go.
You've been doing it more than 3 years.
I've been doing it more than 3 years.
You
because
broke the 3-year curse.
Well, no, not really, because if I have some books that I've worked on for longer than 3 years, and I'm going to tell you it's not happening.
Oh, then you just let it go? It just goes?
Yeah,
okay.
so with a book, you're writing about something different every time. Yeah. And so you can you get all excited and be like, oh, this time I'm going to be writing about, suffragettes, woo, right? And then you finish in 8 months and you're not sick of it. It's great. I love it.
Okay, so now that makes sense, the 3-year thing. Perfect. Yeah. Okay, Aidy, I'm going to get this right.
Good.
Tell us
Perfect.
about other jobs. I've only got, I've gotten 2 out of 5, so.
I'm a little bit like Courtney. I can't stick with one thing for very long. I think I'm probably more 5 years, maybe. It's perfect. I love it. It works out really well. I was also a lifeguard when I was younger, and I loved that a lot. Perfect place to find some good-looking heroes. Yeah. I was also a personal shopper for a little while. My big job when I graduated from college, I was pretty sure, because I had tons of school loans and no job, I showed up at the Quiznos corporate office and said, you want to hire me? And they said, okay. So I worked at the Quiznos corporate office that's based here in Denver for 10-ish years. When they were still teeny tiny, I started working for them when they had 13 stores. Now they have more. But I got burnt out on corporate America pretty easily, and I decided to run away from home, and I became an English teacher in English as a second language, and I taught in the Czech Republic and in Poland, and I spent most of my time teaching in Vietnam, which I absolutely loved. It was a really great experience, but it also gave me a lot of downtime because I taught usually in the evenings and just on the weekends because I taught a lot of little kids. So during the day I had a ton of time to read, and but at the time there were no new bookstores in Saigon where I lived. You could only get like books that backpackers left on their way, and so a lot of them were romances. I also ended up buying one of the very first ebook readers. I bought the Sony e-reader way back in the day. It's not even a thing anymore. And the majority of ebooks that you could get were romances. So I became a big romance reader while I was living there, and I thought, I have all this downtime, I'll try it. I moved home specifically so that I could write, and found out that you can't make money in your first year being an author. Who knew? So I taught some more when I got back to Colorado, but then the last job that I had before I started writing full-time, I was a page at JCPL. Yay, libraries!
So I think maybe you'll have answer to this next question kind of based on the fact that you've all had really interesting and rich pasts. And I think that probably leads to your story development and character development, and that's kind of the question, like, how do you go about that? How do you come up with these characters and story development? And I don't know who wants to take it first. Jen.
I'll go first. So I'm very character driven because I think readers, they have to bond with your characters or they're not going to be invested in your story. So I have to make sure that I know exactly who my characters are, and they normally start talking to me when I do a lot of walking on the trails here, and people I'm from Parker, so they know me there, and I just put on those earphones and then I talk. And my husband tried to get me to do a Bluetooth so it doesn't look like I'm completely crazy, like so they would think like I was talking to somebody, but that really bothered me. So I like those really big headphones and I just walk around talking to myself, and then the characters just start talking. Once they start talking back, then I have an idea of what I'm going to do and where I'm going to do. Like I'm doing a series right now, the Ladies of the Bleecker Street Inquiry Agency. And so I knew that I needed these really quirky characters because they're not going to be intentional inquiry agents. They had this agency unexpectedly because they have to right an injustice. And so they have to be, it's a different type of character. They're not going to be high society or anything like that. So once I figure out that, then they really start talking to me. And then I can sit down and I start writing. And I always have to turn in a proposal to get with my publishing house to get my next contract. So I have to have a basic idea of what I'm going to do, but they know, they've worked with me now for 18 books, so they know that what I turned in and then what they're going to see when I actually turn in the book is not going to resemble it. I mean, like, the idea might be the same, like it is on Bleecker Street, and that's about all that I can tell them that is the same. But, so that's how I start. And then I get into the story, and a lot of times, because I've done it for so long now, I think I know a character, but once you actually get in there and you get them into the plot and everything's going on, and then they don't really want to be that character. And so for me, I don't know about you guys, but it's like you're trying to write through mud. And it's just, they're not going to cooperate, they don't want to do that fun thing or whatever. And so it's not until I actually delete how I'm writing them and start doing what they want me to do that then I can finish the story. So.
I see some nodding there at the end of the table on all this. The character first and then the story plot, is that no? Completely different for you, Courtney? No,
I'm completely different. I don't think that either one comes first. I think that to me they're inextricably intertwined. The way I see it is plot is the thing that you burn your characters in, and everyone burns differently, right? And so if you have one character, like you could have something happen and they'd be like, yeah, whatever, right? And another, you need to have a person that this matters to and that this is going to have an effect on, right? So, what plot you have determines what characters you have, and what characters you have determine what plot you have. To me, it kind of feels like it's like lacing up a shoe. Like not every shoe fits every person, and so you have to have the right shoe, but you also have to pull the laces tight. So that's kind of how I see it.
I like that analogy really well. I'm the same with it has to be both at the same time. I think a lot of times my actual story idea just comes from maybe a scene or something like that. The first book in my dragon series literally was, what if a wedding planner met a dragon? I mean, it's simple. It starts with just that, right? And so I play a lot of what ifs, and I think that I come up with the stories that way. You know, what if a librarian met a werewolf?
What if? Yeah, I mean, I think about that a lot. That's why you guys are authors and we're not. Jennie, do you have something?
So I would say
Jennie. Jennie.
Jennie. I'm really a Jennifer, if that helps. Oh, yeah. So yeah. So in the writing world, we have these kind of two different writing styles, and people talk about if you're a plotter or a pantser. And so a plotter is someone that kind of plots out every detail and really figures out your whole story, and it all follows all the 3-act structure and la 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 la. And then there's the pantsers who kind of fly by the seat of their pants and just kind of let their muse run wild and do, come to them as they're writing. And I used to be very much a pantser when I had plenty of time to write before I started signing contracts that I was going to turn in 3 books in 1 year. And so now I consider myself kind of a plantser. So I do a tiny bit of both. And for me, I see the characters and my stories like a movie in my head. And so I see it kind of running through like a show, and people say, well, how can you keep all of your characters straight? Well, we watch tons of different shows, and we know who all those characters are. You can watch Friends and know who Ross and Rachel are, and you can watch Dexter and know who Dexter is. So even though I write in 5 different genres, and I write mystery stories and cowboys who play hockey, and like, for me, I just see all of those people in my head. And like my page turners, those women, my page turners cozy mystery series is my first series and my first truest love. I just love these women. And for me, whenever I go back to write one of those books, and what I have readers tell me as well is that every time they read one of those books, it's like visiting old friends. And so it's like you start writing the story, and it's like, oh, Edna, there you are. Oh, Cassie, there you are. And so it just feels like you're kind of going home. You're going back to your hometown, and you're visiting with all of your friends. So that's kind of my process, too.
So you guys have to know that writers are getting inspiration everywhere all the time. So we're very observant people. We tend to eavesdrop in public places. I will go to Starbucks just to hear what the people at the next table are talking about. Just to listen in. You're always trying to get inspiration. And I can't say that it's always a character that comes to mind first or a plot. It's been both, and it depends on the book for me. So sometimes I think, ooh, what about this situation? Or I hear of a situation that kind of spurs some ideas. Sometimes it's a character, like what would happen if a wedding planner met a dragon? That kind of situation. Sometimes, like with my first series, it was actually setting that inspired the whole story, because I was in Aspen with my husband, one of my favorite places in Colorado. Love Aspen. And we think of it like this celebrity mecca, but it also has this really rustic side that's really cool if you kind of go on the outskirts and kind of find these little rustic ranches and stuff. And so I thought that would be so fun. What would that look like in 2 people? So a really rustic character, and then this really celebrity kind of heiress character. And so that's kind of where that idea came from, and that whole series is set in Aspen, and I kind of draw on that setting too, just to pull out those characters' personalities and everything a little bit more. So I think it's different for me. My process changes with every book, and yes, just be aware. We're always watching and listening.
And if you come to my office at the bank and you're opening an account, I'm going to ask you what your love story is, and I might use it.
See, that's
Fair game.
It's true. Yeah, it's like airports. When you're stuck in the airport, it's so worth it sometimes.
I love being stuck in the airport.
Yeah, just observing people.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is a more serious question, but I think it's so perfect when we talk about romance and writing for romance. You talk about seeing your stories, obviously, in the people around you or your personal experiences or where you travel to. But you also realize that society sometimes influences it. So in light of the Me Too movement and all of the discussion about that in our society today, romance often feature a feisty female character. But what do you think about when you're writing now in light of those things? Anyone want to go first? Go, Jen.
I'll go first. Go for it. I was the one, I'm like, I really don't like talking to people. I'm just going to kind of sit up here, but okay. So I write historical. So there are rules, especially I write New York high society, or they were called the New York 400. And there were definite rules of decorum, which kind of guide how I'm going to write anyways. But all of my heroines are very independent. They were not indicative of the time. It's definitely taken a little bit of liberty there. But I don't write alpha males because I really like more of like the very intellectual, kind of nerdy, totally clueless about women hero. It just seems to work for me. And I gotta say, like, my husband is no way like that. So it's kind of weird that I like that because he's like this really big bodybuilding guy. And okay, well. But so I really didn't give too much thought to the whole Me Too movement because I do write historical. But not too long ago, I received a letter from a reader, and she had taken issue with one of my scenes in this book. And the scene was the hero and the heroine were set up, and they just, they had this perilous adventure, and they almost died. And he was just so happy she wasn't dead that he just kisses her, and it's toward the end of the book. So that they have feelings and everything. They haven't professed their feelings, but like they're attracted to each other. And so he kisses her, and of course the society matron sees them. Well, the rules of the day, if you were in high society and you got caught in a compromising position, you were going to get married. There was no way around that. That's just how it was. So of course the hero says, we have to get married. And she, being the plucky heroine that was not really of the day, she's dumpy ridiculous. I'm not marrying you just because we got swept up in the moment. And so that was the end of it. So I got this letter from this woman, and so the Me Too thing was right at the beginning of the letter. So I assumed, she was upset because he didn't ask permission to kiss her. That's what I thought, right? No, she was upset because she was like, he was trying to force her to marry him, and I was like, this is going to be a difficult one to respond to because I don't know what to do. And luckily, she had posted it on her blog as well. She left me the link to her blog to make sure that I saw that she was slamming this scene in this book. And another reader stepped forward and said, I don't think that's really fair to criticize her for that because that's what would have happened. So I kind of stole some of that when I responded to her. But it does make you think because the things that you don't think really have to do with the Me Too movement, they do. So I have been stepping back when I write a scene and think, is that going to get me more letters? Or, am I? So, there you go.
You look like you're ready to
Yeah.
So
I know you do look ready.
I find this
she has a
question very
look on her face.
strange, and I'll tell you. I mean, not strange. It arouses very interesting emotions in me because if you remember what I said about being deeply depressed after clerking for Sandra Day O'Connor and a certain judge on the Ninth Circuit, the judge on the Ninth Circuit was Alex Kaczynski, and if you recognize that name, which maybe one of you do because nobody cares about federal judges, except under certain circumstances, then you may also recognize the fact that Alex Kaczynski is one of the few men who actually had a consequence for about 3 months as a result of the Me Too movement. And the reason he had a consequence is because he basically sexually harassed every woman that he was around for years and years and years on the bench, which I know because I clerked for him. And I was included in that number. And in late 2017, a reporter contacted me and asked me if I'd be willing to go on the record. And since I was a romance novelist and didn't have a career as a lawyer to burn down, I was like, yes, I will. And so I have a Me Too story in the Washington Post, and other women came forward. There was another woman who put her name on the record alongside me, and many other people do. And this is a very interesting question to me because I know quite a few romance authors. We didn't need a Me Too movement to know that Me Too existed because we were how many lawyers who are now romance authors? It's an ungodly number of people.
Person.
It's like half the people who are romance authors used to be lawyers. And one of the reasons people were I have this really high-powered career, but I want to quit it, was I have a really high-powered career in a male-dominated field, and nobody will stop sexually harassing me. This sucks. I'm going to start writing romance instead. This is actually, it's fairly common. And, I'm not obviously the only one. That's why it's called Me Too, right? And so, we have this genre that's largely written by women. Many of us, as we've said, we're in the workforce. We have experienced sexual harassment. And so, the idea that we would have been taken by surprise by the Me Too movement is weird to me. We knew women were getting sexually harassed, right? We knew it. We experienced it. We lived it. Many of us wrote it in our books for years before the Me Too movement came along. And you can go back and say, oh, yeah, I can see she's working through this right here. So, I understand that people are curious about this, but I think that this is the idea that romance is solely about alpha males taming feisty women is really a stereotype that comes from outside the genre and not from inside. I think many of us who are here, who are ourselves and know what we like as women, which is generally to not have our consent removed from us. I think that's a general thing that many people prefer. We know what we want to see in fiction because we live through it. So, yeah.
I think there's a big part of fiction in general, not just romance, but all fiction, that the authors are portraying what they wish the world would be like. Even if it's a story about wedding planners and dragons, there's still something in there about what they want the world to actually be. With the Me Too movement, so much of it was about consent. And exactly what Courtney said, I think a lot of us were already writing very specifically about consent in our books before any of this ever started coming up. So I think it was a reflection of the literature was reflecting what was going on in society, and society was saying, oh, that's in literature now. Maybe we can also talk out loud about that? Yeah. And we did. And so I love that I think that literature can make positive movements like that. We were all writing about consent for years, and then women started talking out loud about it.
I think you guys are dead on. I mean, dead on. And when we talk, good for you for speaking out, Courtney, when they called you and asked you. I know that's something that weighs on your heart. Am I going to do that?
But I was lucky because the person who sexually harassed me was semi-famous, right? Most of the people who have been sexually harassed,
unfortunately,
no one will care.
are not.
So,
yeah,
that's the way it is.
Well, we want to get to some other questions too, but this one is specifically from our audience, I believe, Aidy, and it's for you. You said your second language was English, and you often place a different dialect in your books. Where does your inspiration derive from? What was your upbringing?
Mm-hmm. So my first language is English, but I taught English as a second language all over the world. And so doing that, I learned lots of languages, none of which I remember anymore. They go in one ear. I can use them while I'm there. When I was in the Czech Republic, I was almost fluent. I was like, blah, 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 but now that's about as much Czech as I know anymore. When I was in Vietnam, I could get around, tell my taxi driver how to get to my house and buy produce, but I couldn't have a real conversation. I didn't know very many verbs. But it's definitely a huge influence in my stories. I set my stories all over the world. And usually in places that I have either lived or would like to live. Here I come, Edinburgh. And so I think I like to give that flavor because it's one of the things, again, that I love about literature and romance. Specifically, we can be anywhere in our minds. And so I definitely always put a flair of the languages. I like to use pet names in the local language for whatever my probably dragon is calling my probably wedding planner.
Perfect sense. So now this question is kind of broad, but they want to know if there was a specific topic that you'd like to explore in the future. A topic. You got something brewing in the back of your head, anyone? Sarah looks like you do.
Actually, yes, this is something I've been working on a little bit. Writing my next book is a female Army vet. So just a little bit different. A lot of the romance we read has male Army vets, and so I want the heroine to be an Army vet. So I've been doing some research and just talking with people, and that's one of my favorite parts about doing anything new like that is just kind of, finding out, sitting down with somebody and saying, what was your experience? I love to hear people's stories, and that just informs so much of what you write and gives you so much inspiration. So I try to do that with the research, and that's one of my favorite parts. So that's something I'm working on now, so it's top of mind for me, really excited about that book.
I have an idea. I have a thing too. So, a lot of my stories. I'm a small town girl. I'm from a small town in Kansas, and I had a very close relationship with both of my grandmas, and so there are spunky, sassy grandma, old ladies, grandma figures that are like a cross of both of my grandmas. In every one of my books, you're going to find a just wonderful woman that's going to either lead the way in some kind of great conversation or the trouble. Like Edna is always like coming up with the harebrained schemes. But I love the relationship of women and friends, and so I am, at some point, I'm actually kind of pitching right now a women's fiction book, so I would love to move into women's fiction. And because I have this crazy brain that sees danger everywhere, like I don't know if I'm the only person that just like walks through a stairwell and I'm just sure someone's gonna murder me. Like, like 2 o'clock on a Tuesday afternoon, I'm sure there's like a murderer waiting in this stairwell for me. Anyway, I would like to eventually write a psychological thriller, so that's in my list too, because why stick with one genre when you can write 20?
Jennie, if you work in news, you see danger everywhere. I'm just saying. Yeah, a crazy story.
I have like 7,000 things I want to explain. I have a list of like all the stuff, and I won't list them all because, that would be rude and it would take forever. So one, if I have to restrict myself to one, I avoided this for a very long time, but if you follow me on Twitter, you will realize very quickly that I'm a huge figure skating fan. I love figure skating. I missed the end of the U.S. men's short program coming here, and so I ran up to get Wi-Fi so I could get the last 10 minutes of it. Jason Brown did great, yay! So I want to write a book about figure skating at some point.
That'd be super fun. A huge theme in all of my books is the idea that all bodies are beautiful. And that normally is told through the tale of my heroines. All of my heroines are curvy girls, plus size, chubby, whatever you want to say. But in the romance world, our heroes are always super hot. And I would really like to figure out how to do dad bod. Because he's cute too.
I have a freshman in college who is obsessed with trying to build muscles all the time, and he said, "Oh, Mom, the other day some girl goes, no, we're more into dad bods." Just saying, some college girls, some of the hot ones are more into the dad bod.
Well, and I think it's the same message for everybody. If all bodies are beautiful, that means all men's bodies are beautiful as well.
Yeah.
I mean, I already picked out the title. It's gonna be called Cuddle Buddy.
Oh! I love it. This is a question that is a little bit more serious, and this, mind you, I'm not saying this. This is the question. Okay, the romance genre has sometimes been criticized for lacking diversity, but the landscape is slowly beginning to change. What is your favorite diverse romance that you've read recently, or seen or heard? I don't know who wants to jump in on that one first.
I can jump in on that. So this summer, I was at it was actually called Romance Genre Con, and I met Alyssa Cole and Farrah Rashawn, and Pat Simmons is one of my Sourcebook sisters, so I write for Sourcebooks Publishing, and Pat Simmons' new book is coming out with them. They are all just wonderful. I have been I'm reading Alyssa's book right now. If you like Colorado authors, Amelie Howard's new book, Beast of Bestwick, is just so good. It's kind of a Beauty and the Beast kind of, and she lives in Fort Collins. She's a really just firecracker and a just cute little, she's awesome. And another local gal is Alexa Martin, and she lives here in Denver, and she writes in the sports world. So she's married to a professional football player, and so Alexa Martin just writes these great football stories. So there you go.
Any other thoughts?
One of my favorite series is by an author called Kara Lockhart. It's paranormal dragons. You're so surprised. I know you are. And what I like about Kara's Dragons series is that she doesn't specifically say what diversity that her dragons are, but they're from all kinds of different things, all kinds of different backgrounds because of the kind of magical beings that they are. But very specifically because Kara is Asian American, she puts this really great Asian American flair into her series, and I really like those. And then I just started the other day on recommendation from a friend, When Dimple Met Rishi. Super cute YA romance. You got it, you must. It's so cute.
I just want to put in, like, again, this is like, I could have like 1,000 things that I could say, but I really want to put in a plug for Kennedy Ryan. Her book, Long Shot, she was the first Black woman to win a Rita Award from the Romance Writers of America, and this book, like, blew me away. Like, it was one of those ones where you pick it up and, like, the first sentence, like, just it has this emotional weight and meaning that just like it just felt like it grabbed onto my heart. It's a very dark book that touches on themes of domestic violence, among other things. But if you can handle that sort of material, then I just really highly suggest it. It's just like there were parts of it that had me in tears, and it's just like just a wonderful journey, like one of my favorites. I'm also a really huge fan of Mae Peterson's Lord of the Last Heartbeat, which came out recently from Carina Press. It's a book, there's a werewolf, and a magician who has a curse, and it's so lovely, and it's both light and dark at the same time. I don't know, it's like just imagine like really bright lights casting really dark shadows, and I think that gives you an idea of sort of like the feel of the book. It's very, I'm not sure that it has like a crystalline feel to it almost, in terms of just the clarity of emotion that it has. So those are two. If you want more, come up to me afterwards and I'll tell you like a million, like literally a million.
Yes,
You guys give the best
pick
recommendations.
just one. I mean, there's so many amazing books out there. Tracy Livesay is one that she's newer, just read, loved it. The hero has Asperger's, and the heroine's a very strong PR executive. It's just an awesome book. It's humorous, but also deals with some really important issues. So, yeah, just talk to us at the table. We can go on and on about that for recommendations and stuff. I think all of us could do.
I think you guys have good recommendations. We want to get to the audience. We have mic runners, so somebody always had, oh, good, we got a hand up first. I'm like, that's always hard sometimes to get somebody to be first. So we have a question.
So I'm a writer in the male-male romance community, and we recently had a question, and it sparked a lot of debate. Do you think that romance always calls for a dual point of view, or can you do a good romance with a single point of view?
Oh, I definitely think you can do single point of view. My Kirby Love series is all one POV. My Dragon series is not, but I think it depends on what the story calls for. Right. But there's tons that are just single POV. Lauren Blakely's Big Rock, it's not male-male, but the entire book is told from his point of view.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's really, really good. And I think a lot of readers enjoy that. So I think you can do it, for sure.
Yeah. Thank you.
Another question? Oh, here we go.
Let's make them all that easy.
Yeah.
All right, my name's Taylor. My grandma kind of dragged me here, but I'm actually really enjoying it. So,
Yay, Grandma! Give it around to Grandma.
my main question is, so I'm kind of sad that I didn't know any of you. Now I'm going to read all of your books, but it's fine. I'm kind of a young writer. I'm only 19. And I seem to, every time I start like writing something, I'm like, ooh, this would also make a good story. So I start writing something else, and I never finish one story. Do you have any advice on how to do that and not just jump?
Those are called slutty new ideas.
I have a terrible idea that I'm going to share with you, and I just want to say, like, never write books like me. It's a terrible thing to do. It's a pain. Nobody should do this, but I'm going to share it with you anyways because it might help. Okay, so I used to have the same problem, and the thing that fixed it for me was figuring out a really great scene, like somewhere near the end, and writing that scene, and then being like, oh, I have to get them there. Okay, and so like I don't suggest doing this because now I'm stuck writing books out of order, and then I have to get them in order, and then it's like, it's like, how do I get to the scene? Oh no, there's no room for this scene in this book. This scene doesn't fit, right? So like, it's really, don't do this, but do it.
I have a notebook, so I don't let myself start working on a new idea project on the computer. So I keep a notebook for those ideas, and I do start developing them a little bit or writing down thoughts, but I will not let myself put it on my computer because I have a book to finish. So that's where my focus, only one book at a time on my computer. Otherwise, it's writing in the notebook, and you don't want to write a whole novel by hand in a notebook. So
Yeah, I do
that's how
that same thing too. You'll find that writers love office supplies.
Yeah.
And we love buying really neat journals and then never writing anything in them because we're saving them for that one, like, really special, like, this is going to be the special journal. So I have I know, it's terrible. But I have a journal that says, like, I don't remember, something on the front about brilliant ideas. And I do the same thing as Sarah. Like, if I have a really slutty new idea, I just write it down and, keep it for later, because we also have terrible memories, so we forget too, so.
it helps when you have a contract with your publisher and they're expecting a book by a certain day.
Yeah, then you really have
Very
to finish.
motivating.
Yeah, it is.
But like to really get yourself motivated, and if you really want to pursue being a writer, you have to get to the end. So like a lot of times I encourage people to set like a word count goal at the beginning. I don't do that anymore because I'm just always under deadline, so I have no choice but to write like all the time. They also do like NaNoWriMo is in November, where you write a 50,000 word book in 1 month. And so that might give you a spark that you need. But yeah, you just have to sit down. And I mean, I don't like doing writing every day, to tell you the truth, and especially when you don't have a contract, it is hard to stay motivated. So maybe like set yourself a goal of how many words you're going to complete that day. And they're not going to be good words, and you might get rid of them the next day. But if you set that goal, and every day or however many times you want to write a week, then you get those words on the paper. You have to get the words on the paper, and then you just go from there. And it gets easier over time. I mean, okay, not really, but
Yeah, wait.
sometimes it gets easier.
She's lying.
That was a big lie. But
It's okay, lighter. She's young.
but just try like the word counts and start off small. I do a lot of word count per day, but I can I recently just erased 8 chapters because I realized that I had started. I had too much backstory, and I knew I had too much backstory. And again, I've had like a ton of books. And I knew I was going to have to hit the delete button, but I didn't want to, so I wrote a couple extra chapters. And then finally I was like, you just have to do it. And I don't save my work because I know I'm going to try to force it back in. That brilliant idea that I think is so brilliant and it's really not, it's what's messing me up. If I save that somewhere, I'm going to try to put that back in. So I just hit the delete button. So I just wiped out 8 chapters, and then I was really, really behind on a deadline. But love it. It's a great career. Just wonderful
Being
stuff.
a romance writer seems like this super glamorous job, but really the majority of our life is spent in our pajamas, sticking our heads out of the shower because we just had a super great idea, and trying to find, like, recording something on our phone, like some passage of, and it's like really having really, really hard homework every single day and never being done, like never.
I spend a lot of time on my office floor, and I really should put something up on my ceiling because I stare at the white ceiling, and I'm very dramatic, and I fling my hand over my forehead. And now my husband, because I've done this for quite a few years, he literally just stepped over me one day, and he's like, oh, no, and just walked over, and I was like, this is not helping me out. But I did get off that floor pretty fast because I was a little embarrassed that someone stepped over me, and I was like, I got to snap out of this. But you would love it, but just get those words down. Just keep going.
For me, it's all about accountability. If I don't have an actual, real world reason to get the book done, I won't get the book done. So I often will put my books on pre-order before I've written them.
Yeah.
It's really scary, and I've cried a lot.
Don't do that with your first book.
The people at Village Inn and I are really good friends at 2 o'clock in the morning. But also, there's other ways to do accountability. One of the ones that's actually fun for me is I'm writing a book live in my Facebook group online. So I get on Facebook Live and they get to see my screen as I'm writing, and they're waiting for the next chapter. So we have to write it, so it has to get done. So it's a different way to have real world accountability.
Aren't you glad Grandma told you to come? I'm telling you, you learned we all learned a lot. You get stuck sometimes, even if you're writing anything, just even a note to someone. So that's great. Another question. Come on. We got a couple. We got to get a microphone over to you. Or up here, or where are y'all? Microphone? Where are the microphones?
Right here.
Okay, there we go.
What it is I have a lot of stories that have like no ending. And then like this has suffered for years of trying to figure out some sort of ending for them. And mostly there just isn't. And I've got piles of this stuff. And I have no idea what is wrong with me. I can come up with the beginning, sail through the middle, and then, I don't know if anybody had any ideas.
A long time ago, I was sitting in the audience at a panel, and it was all agents and editors, and someone asked them, what do you wish authors knew more about? And the answer literally changed my life, because I went out and made this happen. She said that across the board, they all said, please learn story structure. That doesn't mean a formula, but stories have a way that they are told. And I find that a lot of times when I'm working with newer authors who get stuck or they have what we call the saggy middle, it's because they don't know story structure. They don't know what kind of thing is supposed to happen at that point. So my guess is, and I don't know your stories at all, but maybe you're missing a point in your story structure that doesn't push the story forward. There's a lot of really good resources online for story structure. I personally really love one called W Plot. But come find me later and we can give you other resources as well.
And I think if all of our stories have, your main character should have a goal that they're moving towards. So whatever their goal is that they're moving towards, as the book progresses, you should show them growing. And so the ending should be how they've grown and achieving their goal, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, it's just to break it down to the simplest.
You can look into like the hero's journey, would give you a lot of, it would show you like the story structure, just to give you the basics. And you also might just want to start doing there's a lot of local writer groups, and they bring in people who actually break things down, I do a lot of talks on like the query letters once you're done and everything. Like, I don't do that much about how to write your stories, but there's many people who do. So like Parker Writers Group brings in people, or there's a ton of organizations. There's a thing called Colorado Writers Cafe, and you can get on there and it lists like weekly, probably 20 different writer events that are going on throughout Denver. So it's called Colorado Writers Cafe. Look on there, and then you might find like a local group that you could go and talk to people and figure out like how to get you past there and what you're doing.
And that also gives you accountability and motivates. So if you don't have a community of writers, it really helps to have people who understand.
Agreed.
You can't count on your family for that. So you have to find other writers. I highly recommend, even if it's an online group, even if you don't have time to go, there's a lot of online groups. So ask us about that too.
Yeah, there's just some things that other writers get that nobody else does. When I start talking about like identity to essence, people are like, what are you talking about? If you happen to write romance, we have a Colorado Romance Writers Group that meets the second Saturday of every month, and we always have some sort of a guest speaker that talks about things writers want to know. Sometimes it's story structure. Sometimes
Speak
it's
your own
marketing.
language, that's
Yep.
for sure. Okay, I think we had a question right here, and we'll try and get to some of these. I know we have one here too.
I have a question that's sort of, I think, related to plotting and pantsing, plot pantsers, and also perhaps with genre writing in general, and perhaps romance writing in particular. But how much do you guys feel that the tropes, if you will, if that's the right word, the expectations of your readers, your faithful readers, or the audience in general, how much does that drive what you do? And especially if you're in a situation where you want to write, you don't want to write to that trope, or you don't want to perhaps write to any trope. Do you have to deal with that as romance writers? And what do you do about this editor who's screaming for a book every, 3 months?
I think it depends on, oh, sorry. No, go ahead. I think it depends on what type of book you're writing. So category romance can sometimes be fairly trope heavy. I think it depends on your publisher and what your publisher wants. I write single title for source books, and my editor there is like, get rid of these tropes. And I'm like, I've been writing category for 2 years. She says, I don't care, I don't want these tropes in it. So part of it is if, you know, who you're writing for and who you're writing to, and single title is a little less trope heavy, and I think a couple of years ago tropes were really strong, and so the publishing trends change a lot. I don't know, about 10 minutes ago they were a little bit different. So I think it kind of depends on what type of genre you're writing in there, if that's a vague answer.
No.
No.
So here's my take on this. If you have a particular kind of book that you think you want to write, you should write that book and then figure out who the audience is. It is much easier to find out of the however many million, 33 million, 66 million people in this country? 300 million. It's 300 million people in this country. That's a lot of people. That's a lot of millions of people, and that's just this country, right? There's an entire world in addition to that outside there, right? So imagine 600 million people, and you want this thing, and maybe 0.001% of the entire country wants this thing. And that's like, sorry, I can't do math in my head with people staring at me. That's a lot of people. Let's put it at that, right? Like, that's a lot of people. It's like, in the 60,000s, maybe. I'm making that up. But it's something like that.
But you say it with authority.
Right?
I was with
enough
you.
People that you could have like a career for the rest of your life, writing this book that only you want to write. And the difficult part is not like, ooh, is this trope going to resonate with enough people? Because there are enough people. It's, will those people actually find my book? Because that's the hard part. The hard part of all of this is not, is there someone else in this world who wants this thing I want? There is, I promise you, it's a big world, right? The problem is, can people find it easily, right? So if you want to write a trope, write it. If you don't want to write a trope, don't write it. If one of the things you don't want to write is you don't want to write a happy ending, don't write a happy ending. Just don't call it a romance, right? Yeah. So it's like, it's not that hard. Like, if you want to write something, write it and then figure out what people call it. Because I guarantee you, whatever it is you want to write, someone has written something like it before. Yeah. So I wouldn't worry too much about what people are calling and what this trope is, and am I writing to this trope? Like, don't worry about that. Write the thing you want to write, and assume that if you like it, somebody else likes it, and then just figure out what it is, and then try and do it as best as you can.
Hear, hear. And I don't know if this comes from Facebook. Aidy, you keep getting these questions.
I maybe told my Facebook group that this was going to be live.
You may have, okay. Maybe, that's fine. It says, I'm assuming this is directed towards you. I want to know, how do you have a romance with a dragon? I'm guessing that's for you.
So in paranormal romance, I write in a category called shifter romance, where they shift from some sort of a paranormal being to a human. So there's no weird... You know what I'm saying?
Makes perfect sense to me.
Right?
Yes.
Although there could be.
We have a question right here.
Not you.
Yeah.
Okay, so my question is for all of you. When you are coming up with characters, when you're developing them, how do you go about researching and building characters who are very different from you, who have experiences that you haven't had, whether that's they're a different race, they're a different gender, they're from a different historical period, they participate in a sport you've never done. If you could talk about the process for getting into their heads.
I would say for me, talking to people, you can read a lot, but actually there's a difference when you sit across from someone and look into their eyes and hear them tell their story. And so for me, it's just a lot about collecting stories from people who have experienced that when I haven't experienced it. And you can gain so much just from that interpersonal communication, contact, getting their emotion. You know, all of those things are so important for me in my research process. I don't know.
Yeah, and I do, because I do historical, I know way more about the Gilded Age than I ever thought. And when I first started, for the people who are aspiring writers, like, what I didn't realize is that my publishing house really wanted to brand me almost. So I am known as the Gilded Girl. So I am going to be in the Gilded Age forever. It's a good thing there's a lot of fodder there. It's a great period in history. If you haven't researched it, I would suggest it. But so I do a lot of, I get a lot of stories, memoirs, biographies, and then there's just so much interesting stuff. I was recently reading about a woman, and I'm going to put her in a book because she wanted cosmetic surgery. She thought she had a dent in her head, and she was very vain. And so she went and she had paraffin injected in her forehead. And this was like right around, like right at 1900s. And what happened was the paraffin then started to melt down her face, and it settled in her chin. So you start reading about all of these fascinating things. So for me, that's how I craft like just really interesting characters, because I'm not sure how that's going to play out. But there will be one with paraffin in her chin. So there you go.
I don't do it that way.
I would say the same thing as far as talking to people. Just last night, I was on the phone with my brother-in-law as I drove home, who's a veterinarian, asking him about, can a mother dog nurse an orphan, another dog's puppies. I have all sorts of tons of questions. My dad's a veterinarian. I'm always calling my dad, and my dad is so funny. He's just like, well, veterinarians in my day, you got to have the guy take off his shirt because you don't want him to get dirty. I'm like, okay, Dad.
Perfect.
He doesn't
That
get
works
his shirt
in romance.
like
Perfect.
dirty, And then 20 minutes later, I was on the phone with my friend's husband, who's a fireman, and I was like, okay, so what I need a fire that's going to just burn down the kitchen, but not go to the house, but that's going to be this. And most people love it. They love being part of it. They love talking about it. And because I work at the bank, I also use my bank customers, or I tell the tellers, okay, I need a fireman today and I need a police officer. So if you see one walk by, because we work at an in-store, so we work at it inside of a grocery store. So I'll just wave down these people and I'll see a police officer and I'll be like, hey, do you have a minute that I could ask you? And I had one day where I happened to walk out in the parking lot, and there were two, I kid you not, I live in Colorado Springs. I kid you not, two mounted police officers on horseback. And I'm writing a book about this sheriff in Montana. And so I walk up to them, and they're thinking, oh, she wants to pet our horse. And I was like, hey, fellas, could I ask you a couple of questions about, the law enforcement? And they're like, yeah, sure. And I start getting into secret babies and DNA, and can you find out who the father is through chewing gum? And these officers are like, whoa, we thought you just wanted to pet the horse. And Google is our friend. We just research, we hope no one ever looks into our Google history.
So I think there's a lot of great advice there, and I think that one thing that we need to say is that some of the things that you mentioned as, people different from us are not like the others. And so I think there's a big difference between, writing a fireman when you're not a fireman and writing someone who is of a race or a sexuality or whatever that you are not, especially if that person generally is excluded from the dominant narrative that we see in society. And the reason that's an issue is because you may have internalized stereotypes that you don't know you've internalized. And you can say, I'm going to do research on this, and if all the research that you do does not tell you what the internal experience of that person is, you're still going to screw it up. And I think that you don't have to look too far to find people who are being criticized for screwing things up. And, oh God, everyone's laughing at me. But it's definitely true. And, I think that it's something that you should be wary of because, if I'm writing a historical novel and I screw up what it's like to be in Britain in the 1800s, I'm not hurting anyone's feelings, really. They're all dead, right? They don't care, right? But if I write a novel in which I make people believe that it's, that people who are like this are all drug dealers, I am screwing up. I am hurting people. I am reinforcing stereotypes, and that causes harm, right? And so I think it's really important that, like, one of the things that you do, if you do want to, this is really a beyond a one question discussion, but I think one of the things the thing you first have to do is make sure you know what the harmful stereotypes are, so you can evaluate the sources you're looking at and ask yourself, is this a thing that I should be looking at? If you don't know what the stereotypes are, you can't evaluate anything you're looking at, and you can't tell yourself, like, is this thing I'm doing for research harmful or not? So I'd say, number one, you've got to teach yourself what's harmful. And if you can't do that, then I would say don't, And I think there are some things that you can look at and say, it's at this point, like, I may have internalized so much that I need to step back and not do this right now. So.
But I also want to add to what Courtney said. I don't want you to be afraid to write diversity in your books, because I think that it's important in our world to show that there are more than just white people who fall in love. But there's ways to do the research, and there's also a billion different Facebook groups. Facebook is a lot of places that I get a lot of good stuff. There's some really great resources there. If you want to write something diverse that is not from your experience and you're not sure if you did it well or did it right at all, get a sensitivity reader. And that's easy as pie these days, because people want to help you do it. But I'm going to also address the other thing with writing characters who are not you. I mean, I'm not a dude, but I write dude. I'm not a dragon, but I write dragons, right? But what is important to me in every single one of my characters is two very basic things. What is their wound, and what flaw did that create in them? Because that is the journey that I'm going to take them on throughout the entire book to overcome that flaw. And in my books, the answer is always love.
Okay, we have a question right here in front.
I'm just curious about your thoughts. I'm not sure if you realize, but there's several publishers that do not allow libraries to have ebooks, more than one, or to buy them in ways that we used to. So they are making them more difficult for libraries to get. If I was an author, I would make sure that my book was not published by one of those publishers. For example, Amazon, all of the publishers that Amazon owns, they are making it difficult for libraries to get. One of the things that, they do not realize, not everybody in our country can afford to buy books. Library does grow readers, and libraries is one of the reasons that, some people end up buying a lot of books. And, we grow readers. We start when people, kids are little, and why are they not supporting us and helping us get these ebooks? I'm just curious what, I kind of wish that, authors would just stop using these publishers since they're doing this. This is my thought, my opinion. But I'm just curious about your opinions.
So, one, I think that publishers that don't make their books available to libraries suck, right? So that's very just, like, in my mind, I'm sorry, I think there's no excuse for it. I think it's extremely short-sighted. I grew up in a not wealthy family, and every book that I read came from the library, and that is why I now buy like 1 billion books a year, right? And that is, I think there are so many people who would buy books if they had the money, and what we want is readers in general, and I think libraries foster that. So that's thing number one. Thing number two, I have a friend who, was a huge hit as a self-publishing author, and they decided they wanted to go with a traditional publisher so they could more easily get their books in libraries. So they signed a deal with Macmillan, and then like 2 months later, Macmillan announced that they weren't sending their books to libraries anymore. And so now it's like, great, thanks, right? I wanted to be in libraries, and now, but you've signed a contract and you're locked in, and it's like, it sucks. it sucks all around. And I know there are a lot of authors who are extremely unhappy about the thing, and they, you know, they can talk to their publisher, they can say, I think you're doing the wrong thing. But once you've signed a contract, you know, that book is theirs forever, basically. And that's, you know, that authors don't have a huge amount of power here. I really just hope that they lose enough market share that they realize that they're doing the wrong thing and they correct it. I don't know what else to hope for.
I think the way that we can change it is from within, and use our own pockets and our own money to show that we want publishers to make things available to libraries, but also ask your library to buy books that you want them to have. There's a lot more options than there used to be because of the advent of self-publishing. I'm 100% self-published author. I don't have a publisher besides me. But it's hard for me to get into libraries because libraries don't always know about me because I don't have a great big publisher to tell them. So it's also up to you, the readers, to say, hey, this is an author that I like. Will you please buy their books?
Do we have another question? Runner, right down here if we can get a microphone.
So I have two questions, actually. The first one, Jennie wins the next page turner. And then the other part is actually for all of you. I started stalking Jennie quite a while ago. But how do you all feel about the people that are your fans on Facebook, Instagram, do you like hearing from them?
Yes. Love
We love it.
We're lonely. Okay. We sit behind a computer, and coming to things like this, and when we get letters, it means the world to us, because then we know that our words aren't just out there somewhere. They're in someone's heart, and that makes us happy, gives us joy, and that's a lot of the reason we do what we do. So please communicate with us. Yes.
Interact with your authors, and I can't speak for all of them, but I've become friends, like actual friends. I'm looking at some of them in the audience right now that started off as fans, and I am friends with them in real life.
Yes.
Not just on the page. Yes, we love you.
And I think what everyone needs to realize is the readers, interacting with readers, like that's really the best part of our job, you know, and it does make it worth it when, you know, you've had you're behind on a deadline or whatever, and then somebody reaches out to you on Facebook and, you know, and they put a picture of your book and with them smiling, and it's, you know, I mean, that's cool. So for me, it's the best part of the job, you know, if they're, you know, and if we didn't have readers, none of us would even have a job. So thank you. This is great.
And I think that as writers, a lot of us go through this thing called imposter syndrome, where we think any day now someone's going to figure out that I don't know what the heck I'm doing.
I'm not cool.
Or that, you know, you're in this hard job and you're working so hard and you think, oh, I'm never going to make it, or this scene I just wrote is terrible. And then you open up your Facebook or you get a message from a reader that says, I just read this, I loved this, I feel like Edna was my grandma, I feel like, you know, I could totally relate to this character, and it just gives you this hope and this feeling like, oh, I can do this. Sometimes it is, you would not believe how it is exactly what we need to hear at the exact moment. And I can tell you that woman's words to me one day, God dang, she sent me this message that talked about how she connected with one of my characters, and it just brought me to tears. And that's what we're doing this for. We are writing for you guys, and we're writing stories to touch your hearts. And sometimes we write these scenes and we just bawl right through them and keep typing. And sometimes we crack ourselves up because we think we're hilarious, whether you guys or not. We think we're super funny. And so having a reader come to us and say, your story touched me, that one moment meant something to me, that one I was that person in your book. That is what we live for. So, and we get those messages. Like when you go to an author's website and you send them a message, we get those. They pop right in. And they just mean the most to us. And it doesn't matter how big or small or how many books you've written. If someone sends you a message and tells you that your words touch them, it's everything. It's everything. And I'm working on the next page turner. It's coming.
Working on it.
So you, Jennie, you don't get that at the bank? The same feeling? Okay. All right. I think we have time for one more question. Although people are happy when they have more money than they think they do. You find $20 in your pocket and you're like, what? It's my lucky day. Okay, one more question. There we go.
I wonder if you all could talk about the sex scene.
You know
and
it.
how we were talking in the car over. Where does romance end and erotica begin? Like, what are the lines you don't cross? How do you write so that it's new and fresh, but not freaky? I don't know.
So I can go first on this one because I write for the inspirational market, so there is no sex in my book. So it's like Mickey and Minnie Mouse when their noses touch. That's about as hot as it's gonna get. So there you go.
I write all the sex. For me, 100%. I mean, I have a series that has been called erotica, and there is a difference between erotica and erotic romance. Erotica is said to be, because I don't write it, it's just for titillation. So it maybe is just a scene where tab A is going into slot B. Right? But what the difference is in romance is a sex scene changes the characters. It changes the people. It is usually the point in the story where they are most vulnerable with each other, and not just with their bodies, with their hearts and their souls. This is the part where they're saying, I love you so much I can give you all of this. So for me, that's the difference. Even when I'm writing 12 sex scenes in one book, all of them are really important to the story. It moves the story forward because it's important to those characters' lives and their journey. So that's my answer with all of the sex.
So one thing I would suggest is that you get books that have sex scenes that you think are good, and also get books that have fight scenes that you think are good. And go through and look at them, because the thing you will discover is that a fight scene and a sex scene are not different. It's just a matter of which body parts are connecting. And the thing you'll discover is that a good fight scene is never about who's punching whom. It's always about a goal, right? Like, I gotta knock this guy out, because if I don't, then I'm not gonna be able, like, I honestly don't write fight scenes ever, so this is not, like, I'm not gonna describe the best fight scene in the world, but, like, if I don't knock this guy out, then, like, the bank is gonna get robbed and I'm gonna lose my job, right? And so you have that fear. I'm sorry. But, you know, you have that fear that's driving it, right? And so the scene is not about, you know, like, can I punch the robber in the face? The scene is about, will I lose my job? Right? And so it's that emotion that is driving the scene. And all the things that happen, the description of the action and all of the stuff is stretched around that emotional conflict, right? And you'll discover that a sex scene is very much the same way. It's maybe different emotions. Usually you're not having sex because you're afraid, well, never mind, let's stop there. But you know, like, it's different emotions. It's different emotions, but it's, a good sex scene is not about describing what's happening between the bodies. It's about describing what thing somebody wants and how they're moving towards that, and where they're conflicted and what they're worried about. And, you know, it's about sensation and emotion, and not about, like, you know, what is going where at the time.
And I feel like they're all different because the characters are different, or at least they should be. You shouldn't be writing the same characters every time. And so, you know, you're looking at those two characters, where they're at in their journey, where they're at in their individual journey and journey together, and that's going to change the dynamics. even in a sex scene, whatever scene, that it's all about that inner journey and how is that going to affect them and how is this going to look afterward and what's going to happen conflict-wise here. So I feel like it's not as hard as you would think to come up with something new and different and with a sex scene even, because it's so intertwined with who the characters are, and it's a way that they're connecting or bringing out their issues or their wounds or whatever. So it's very tied into the character development even. Now that said, you can come up with some fun, different ideas, right? I think.
Yeah. Change the location.
We don't want to be bored. Yes. Yeah. One time I was like, "Hey, honey, do you think it's possible in a sleeping bag, a mummy bag? Let's get in here. Come on, try this, and we'll, I like to, make sure it's gonna work." No, I'm just kidding. He's gonna kill me for that. But yeah, changing the location is good, but also just making it about that emotional piece too, I think is what we all try to do. And then for me with my books, everybody asks me about that, about the sex scenes and blah, blah. And I maybe have 2, maybe one. And it's like, 8 pages out of 400. So it's not the whole book, and that's not all romance is. And so it's funny that question always comes up over and over, because that's not the main thing that, that we're thinking about. We're thinking about these 2 wounded people, what do they need, how can they connect, and how can we get them past their wounds and help them find healing. And so, a lot goes into that. So anyway, that's my perspective on
And
it.
we have fun with it too. We have to have fun with it. If I've written 25 books and all of my books have 2 to 3 sex scenes in them, I have to do something different. Otherwise, it's going to be the same scene every single time. So sometimes it's kind of fun just to switch up the locale, switch up the location, And we are writing tribe, like Sara was talking about. We have these great writer friends who we get stuck and we call them up, and then your friend says, "Well, I challenge you to use the tailgate of a truck." And then you're like, okay, or whatever it is. So yes, you do have to but we have fun with it too. You have to have fun with it.
I think we should go on, but they're telling me that I had to wrap that up. You all have been so fabulous. How much... Just so many great takeaways about your passion for this, how you got to this, and we're so grateful that you all continue to write, which is hard. I don't know how you do it, but you keep on writing. But the connection you have to your readers and everyone, it's so clear and so obvious. So I think you all, if you get a chance to chat and visit and then look people up, if you haven't heard about one of our authors on stage, and you're like, I've got to read something that she wrote, that sounds great, because I think they're on it, right? Aren't they great? We love how their minds work and how they're sharing their stories. So we're just so glad you found this, your passion, However you got there, whether it was through law school or chasing dragons or banks or on adventures or laying on the floor staring at a white ceiling. You get there, and we're grateful for all of you.